In 1982, a group of about 60 college students in the Atlanta area gathered together for a picnic at Piedmont Park. One of the event's founders and member of the Washington, D.C. Metro Club told WABE website, "We centered around camaraderie, party, music." Combining the word picnic with the name of a popular dance called the Freaknik was born. It became an annual event, typically held during the third week of April. Each year, the event got bigger and bigger. Since the event was typically unorganized without any real structure, attendees would cruise the streets for hours, causing gridlock traffic. People danced on the side of the roads, on top of cars, and, of course, would get their freak on whenever and wherever. Trying to describe Freaknik is difficult because you had to be there to understand it. But we'll show you this clip so you can see how it all went down. Oh, and don't be surprised if you see your mom and your aunties in this footage.
Yo, yo!
Outkast mentioned Freaknik in their songs, and films like School Days and The Players Club made reference to it also. Even a 1989 episode of A Different World mentioned the Freaky Festival, adding to its allure. As more Black college students headed down south to see what all the commotion was about, more issues arose. Mainstream news reported every unfortunate incident, placing Freaknik under a microscope and putting Atlanta in a negative light. The city tried to steer the event in a different direction by sponsoring a job fair to be held during Freaknik. But what they failed to realize was people didn't go to Freaknik to look for employment. They went to Freaknik to party.
Just like the real players from the Himalayas. Who you with? Who you with? ATL, baby!
Atlanta residents began to dread the yearly event. Even though Freaknik added an estimated $20 million to Atlanta's economy, it became apparent that Atlanta didn't want the money, and residents wanted their city back. In today's video, we'll be exploring how the wholesome picnic transformed into a massive, uncontrolled party, and what led to the city stepping up its efforts to push the majority Black Freaknik attendees out of Atlanta. Before we get started, don't forget to grab something to eat at rrgsnacks.com, our online concession stand that has an assortment of delicious treats like Cinnamon Toast Crunch popcorn, barbecue beef jerky, and bacon jerky. Okay, now let's jump into today's video. In the late 80s, Freaknik was being promoted by party flyers, which drew in attendees from across the US, Canada, and even Europe. As the 90s came around, Atlanta was gaining more momentum as the Black Mecca, and the music scene with artists like Outkast and Goody Mob added electrifying elements to Freaknik. Artists would debut their new songs at the event, and the streets were filled with loud music and parties. Men would walk around with their camcorders to capture footage of scantily clad women dancing on top of cars. Artists like Adina Howard, Uncle Luke, and Jermaine Dupri were regular attendees. While college students anticipated the yearly event, the locals began to dread it. According to Complex magazine, Atlanta residents would take time off from their jobs and escape the city before the crowds rushed in. Freaknik 1993 promised to be a little more organized, and some people even called it Freedom Fest to give it a new identity. Students attempted to organize concerts, but their permits were denied at the last minute. This led to even more attendees flooding the roads to party. It was around 1994 when the attendance had grown to about 400,000 people, and it exceeded the typical college students. These new attendees brought a lot of trouble along with them. Bad behavior was on the rise, with crimes ranging from indecent exposure to women being taken advantage of. The city's mayor, Bill Campbell, knew there needed to be some changes. Ahead of the 1995 event, the mayor promised to keep Atlanta a safe place for its residents by discouraging partygoers from attending Freaknik. He even received some help from Atlanta college presidents, who sent letters to all of the nation's HBCUs, pleading for them to tell their students to stay away. When it became apparent that people were determined to attend Freaknik no matter what, the mayor announced that they were welcome to come, as long as they obeyed the law, and he would make sure of it. Law enforcement officials were told to block off neighborhoods and to lock up anyone exhibiting any kind of unruly behavior. The police chief also allocated $300,000 in overtime pay to beef up the police force. City leaders were afraid that the crackdown would only incite more bad behavior. So according to the LA Times, the National Guard was called in to stage drills nearby, preparing for anything and everything that might go down. Locals fled the city, and some businesses closed up shop in preparation for what many believed would be the most violent Freaknik ever. Were the extra precautions really necessary for a group of students who were just looking to unwind and have a good time? Not according to the late civil rights leader, Hosea Williams. Many of you might know him as the grandfather of Real Housewives of Atlanta star Portia Williams. Hosea was concerned the police would overreact with innocent partygoers, so he sent a letter to the U.S. Attorney General asking that federal observers be brought into the city to keep an eye on things. But Atlanta city officials made it clear that police officers were well prepared to handle the event and claimed officers had even undergone sensitivity training ahead of time. So what was the real reason the city was so fixated on controlling that year's Freaknik? Well, it was reportedly due to a computer trade show that was scheduled to take place at the same time as Freaknik. The city was ready to welcome the 85,000 trade show attendees with open arms, all while discouraging Freaknik attendees from stepping foot in the city. News of the increased measures didn't deter the festivities, though. Mississippi native Terry Jackson told The Times, "It was so good last year, I had to come back again to make sure I wasn't dreaming." The April 1995 event kicked off with a bang. A reporter from the LA Times was in attendance to report on all the debauchery. According to the news outlet, parks and neighborhoods were trashed, and there were numerous reports of a lot of freaking. According to the Washington Post, a small percentage of attendees were locals who weren't enrolled in college, and they were completely out of control. Women were taken advantage of, and there were countless fights and reports of public intoxication. Bad weather caused many of the attendees to move the party indoors to local shopping and entertainment complexes. The New York Times reported 11 stores near underground Atlanta were ransacked, and 100 looters invaded department stores in southwestern Atlanta while onlookers cheered. Over 200 people were reportedly locked up, with the mayor attributing most of the disturbances to, quote, a few lawless thugs. One attendee named Corey Griffin told The Times that law enforcement tried to stop the party before it even got started. He added, "I think it's nice to come down here and spend some money, but I felt I was unwanted."
The International Olympic Committee has a...
But in 1996, with the city set to host that year's Summer Olympics, neighborhood groups called for more enforcement, while others asked the mayor to ban the event entirely. Students fought back and couldn't believe that the majority black city and home of the nation's oldest historically black colleges would be so intolerant and unwelcoming to black partygoers. Why was it that Atlanta was well equipped to host 2 million Olympic visitors, but they couldn't handle a few 100,000 black students? Did race play a role in the city's efforts to get rid of Freaknik? Many believe so. Despite calls to shut down the event, the mayor chose a new tactic. He simply distanced himself from Freaknik. He formed a committee composed of clergy, students, business leaders, and neighborhood activists, and repeatedly stated that Atlanta was, quote, not in the party business. He washed his hands of the event and told students and promoters they were on their own. A group of students tried to rent Piedmont Park, but their plans fell through because they couldn't raise enough money for permits and insurance, and no one from the city stepped in to help. And then a promoter named Stephen Muhammad, who was also a member of the Nation of Islam, was able to secure a permit to hold a concert at Grant Park, a rolling green space in a neighborhood of middle-class and mostly white families. The city granted his permit, and after rumors began to swirl that Minister Louis Farrakhan was going to attend and address the students in the park, Grant Park residents took the issue to court. The residents sued the city of Atlanta, arguing that their neighborhood and its park were inappropriate for such a large gathering. In the end, Stevens' permit was revoked because he didn't obtain the proper insurance, and the residents dropped their case. Police still planned to block non-residents from using neighborhood streets, which meant Freaknik traffic was diverted into intricately planned traffic loops to keep the cruisers out of the city and back onto the interstate. There were also plans to close 2 freeway ramps, one near Atlanta University Center, which was a major gathering spot during past events. When the 1996 event began, some businesses closed up once again. Bus routes were altered to avoid the pandemonium, and police wrote thousands of tickets. There were more reports of attacks against women, and a very unfortunate event made headlines. A 24-year-old Ohio resident named Donnie Cantrell was visiting Freaknik for the first time. He and 2 of his friends were sitting in a car talking to some women outside of an apartment building when they were approached by several men. What happened next was described as a robbery gone wrong. Donnie lost his life, and the 3 suspects were later sentenced to life behind bars. In 1997, the city realized that people were going to show up to Freaknik no matter what, and Atlanta expected even larger crowds than the year prior. The city established a website and a hotline for the event and even made a map to help Freaknik attendees navigate their way through Atlanta. But the event continued on the decline. Crime and traffic began spilling over into Atlanta's elite areas, such as Midtown and Buckhead, and there were more calls for the city to take action. Freaknik 1998 took place, and the footage from the event shocked the nation. Video broadcasts showed several women being chased by men, with one woman flailing her arms to fight off a mob. MTV aired equally disturbing footage of women being harassed. One man who was on hand to monitor the crowds said he had to pull a woman away from a swarm of 20 to 30 men during broad daylight. As news spread with the message that Freaknik was an unsafe place for women, attendance dropped. In addition to word getting around that Atlanta police were cracking down on the slightest infractions, many college students decided it was best to go elsewhere. Less than 50,000 people attended Freaknik 1999, and the city's police chief told the Baltimore Sun there were hardly any women in attendance. Law enforcement officials actually witnessed disappointed men driving around aimlessly, looking for women. The small number of women who actually showed up were closely guarded and protected by the police. The Baltimore Sun wrote, impromptu photo opportunities with women flashing were discouraged by officers who quickly moved in and broke up the activities before they got out of hand. In April 2000, the Freaknik that people knew and loved was pretty much over. Many college students chose to go to more welcoming spring break events across the nation. Throughout the years, several people have attempted to resurrect Freaknik, but it just wasn't the same, including the family-friendly Freaknik that took place in 2019. And 21 Savage brought more attention to its glory days by throwing a Freaknik-inspired birthday party in 2021. Many people think Freaknik is one of those events that should stay in the past, especially since it's hard to recapture a moment in time that's largely undocumented. Freaknik might not be what it used to be, but the event still gets credit for helping to shape Atlanta's culture into what it is today. If you enjoyed this video, let us know down below. And thanks for watching RRG.